Let's talk about this, the Galaxy S23 Ultra, because I've been using this as my main everyday phone for a little over a week now, and while you've probably already watched a million videos on this guy, I have some thoughts as well, because having taken it around San Francisco after Samsung's Unpacked launch event, and then to LA for a few days, including to the Grammys, where I had a little behind-the-scenes tour during rehearsals, and also I got to attend the Producers and Engineering Awards, which was a whole lot of fun. And by the way, all these shots were taken on the S23. So after taking about a billion photos, playing some games, running some benchmarks, and keeping an eye on the battery life, what do I think so far? Well, it's really good. I mean, you'd hope so, right? For £1,250. It is an awful lot of money, although technically they haven't increased the price compared to last year. This is the S22 Ultra, here's one I made earlier, and what they've done is dropped the cheaper 128 gig storage option, so now it starts at 256, although same 8 gigs of RAM, albeit faster LPDDR5X RAM and also faster UFS 4 storage, but for the same £1,250 price as last year's 256 gig model. And actually, Samsung do have some deals on the S23 right now, including doubling your storage for free, and I'll leave a link below if you do want to check that out. Compared to the iPhone 14 Pro Max, for the same storage, 256 gigs, this is actually £70 cheaper. So on the one hand, yes, they haven't increased the price, but it's a higher starting point, and it is a lot of money, and there's a lot of strong competition to this. The iPhone 14 Pro Max, and also the new Vivo X90 Pro, and then on the slightly cheaper end with the Pixel 7 Pro, or even this, the new OnePlus 11, which starts at $729 here in the UK, or $699. Yes, this has a better camera, and the S Pen, and a few more bells and whistles, but they share the same chip, and this is 500 quid cheaper. It's a hard upsell. But putting that to one side, the headline upgrades with the S23 Ultra include the faster chip, the upgraded cameras, and also surprisingly the better battery life. Those are the big three. But as well as that, the speakers are also a lot better. They're louder, richer, we get more bass, and side by side, even though it's a little bit tricky to show on a YouTube video like this, it's a noticeable step up.
Be careful who you put your faith
Less obvious, but an upgrade nonetheless, is Gorilla Glass 2 now protecting the front and back, which is a little bit more scratch and fracture resistant than Victus Plus that we had before. They've also reduced the size of the curve on the edge of the screen by 30%, so more of the screen is flat. And they've slightly tweaked the design. The corners are a little bit less rounded than before, and it does feel a bit more boxy to hold versus even last year's S22 Ultra. And they've shifted the layout of the buttons a little bit, so yes, you do have to buy a new case. 1,250 quid and you don't even get a charger or a case. They really know how to squeeze you for every penny. From the outside, not much has changed, but don't let that fool you. This is a big upgrade. Let's talk about this chip, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. And the good news, as you probably know by now, is that all S23 models around the world get the 8 Gen 2. There is no more Snapdragon versus Exynos, which is a bit of a shame because I used to enjoy making those videos. But it is good news because for years I've been banging on about how here in the UK and other parts of the world, with the Exynos, we've basically been getting the inferior version of the phone. Now everywhere, 8 Gen 2. And actually not just any 8 Gen 2, 8 Gen 2 for Galaxy. They've boosted the CPU clock speed, we get some Snapdragon Sight AI camera upgrades and a few other things. But most importantly, it's a lot faster.
one in the squad.
And to demonstrate that, here are two S22 Ultras, one with the Exynos and one with the Snapdragon. Let me show you my results from Geekbench, as well as the 20-minute 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme Stress Test. Not only are the peak scores between 50 and 70% higher, but the stability is also better than the older Snapdragon S22. But to top it all off, the S23 also used the least battery life. So, speaking of battery, despite the fact that we have the exact same size 5,000 mAh cell, and maybe a small part of me wishes that we still had the Note series and so that we could have the S23 Ultra without the S Pen and an even bigger battery. But anyway, even though the standard S23 and the Plus both have bigger batteries now, they've bumped it up by 200 mAh, it's the same size in here. But thanks to the more efficient Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 chip, and also the screen, because we have LTPO3 now, so the dynamic refresh rate is even more efficient, it's a bit faster, and actually even the materials they use for the screen helps to preserve battery, it all adds up to make this last a decent amount longer. After 5 hours of moderate use in YouTube, social media apps, bit of gaming and shooting some 4K video, the S23 had 60% of its battery left versus 55 and 52% on the S22s. So it's not a night and day difference, but you're looking at roughly an extra hour of battery. As my friend Dick McCogan would say, coffee, check, cheers. Can I show you the best thing ever? It's called Scribe, and they're very kindly sponsoring this video, but honestly, I would have done this for free because it's so friggin' useful, although don't tell them that. Scribe is a free Chrome extension, or desktop app if you prefer, and it's a really handy way of creating step-by-step guides and tutorials. For me, whenever I work with a new editor, I have to show them how to upload a video and all the tags and the settings I like on my channel. Normally I just take a bunch of screenshots and put them in a Google document and do some annotations, or a screen recording, but then it's a big file and you can't really mark it up. It's a real pain. So to save yourself a headache, try Scribe, and all you have to do is press record, just go through the process once, and it will then auto-generate a step-by-step guide, which you can edit, you can add extra tasks, you can delete stuff, you can change the text. Try it once and I promise you there'll be a million ways you can think of using this. And I can imagine for teachers, for students, for onboarding at a new job, anything that you have to guide someone through a process, the whole thing is incredibly intuitive and it's all completely free, and you can get started with my link in the description below. And you can also upgrade to Scribe Pro if you prefer, if you want to record both on web and your desktop. But start with a free version and create professional guides and tutorials in just a couple of minutes. So it's faster, it lasts longer, but what about the camera? Does the 200 megapixels and the new sensor and the better processing really live up to the hype? Because it's a similar quad lens setup, although now we do get a 200 megapixel main camera with the upgraded ISOCELL HP2 sensor, which yes is superior to the HP3, confusingly, that Samsung make. Then there's the 12 megapixel ultra wide, where not a whole lot has changed, although it still doubles as the macro, which now has a shorter focal length, so you can get even closer to your subject. And then we have the two 10 megapixel telephoto lenses. And on paper, the specs are very similar to before, although Samsung tell me they have upgraded the hardware. Up front, we have a new 12 megapixel selfie, which is surprisingly down from last year's 40 megapixels, but we do now get dual autofocus, and video now tops out at 8K 30 on the rear camera, up from 24 last year, although more importantly, stabilization, particularly in low light, has been significantly improved. The fantastic Expert RAW app has also been updated, and you can now access it within the More tab within the camera rather than having to open a separate app. And they've also bumped the RAW resolution up to 50 megapixels from 12. And while the S22 also had an astrophotography mode, which is basically just a long multiple exposure shot, they've added a new sky guide, which superimposes a star map over what you're looking at, which is quite cool. But now let's bring in the S22 Ultra because I want to show you some side-by-sides. Generally, the S23 has a more natural, less over-sharpened look. It's like Samsung have dialed back the processing. The S23 shots are more professional looking. Color, especially skin tones, are now much warmer and more natural. It's also generally a bit brighter, sometimes leaning towards being overexposed, especially in portraits, which can kind of ruin the shot. But then on the flip side of that, we do also see the dynamic HDR kick in more often now when you have particularly bright elements in an image, like TV screens or the sun, reducing that brightness and giving you a more evenly exposed photo. Zooming in, whether it's the 3 times, the 10 times, or even up to 30 times, which is still very usable, I've noticed subtle improvements with more detail and more accurate colors, although occasionally more noise as well. Sadly though, anything beyond 30 times all the way up to the 100 times is still unusably bad. It's not really improved here, nor were the astrophotography or the moonshots I took. Nothing's really changed there. And also, unfortunately, shutter lag doesn't seem to be significantly better. The lighting is definitely tricky, but I was trying to grab a shot of Sylvie, my cat, and she proved just as elusive on both. I couldn't get a photo in focus. As you would expect, in good light, the shutter lag was a lot faster, and I was quite impressed with how these portrait shots of the doggo came out, well, until he started shaking. However, what has really impressed me is video. I think this is the biggest upgrade for the camera overall, and in particular the stabilization. For my money, it's on par with the iPhone now, which is a huge step forward for Samsung, and is particularly noticeable in low light. Side by side, you can feel the vibration of every footprint on the S22, but while not flawless, it's much smoother now. Selfies are a bit of a mixed bag. In good light, it is noticeably better, more true-to-life colors, more detail, but then in low light, again side by side with the S22, it actually seemed to come off worse, and it struggled with the focus more, which was surprising given the new dual autofocus. Perhaps it was just having a bad day, and I do need to spend more time with the camera. Overall though, it is a decent step up in terms of the camera. Probably not enough to make me want to chuck this in the bin or, at least trade in for the S23 Ultra in terms of the camera alone, but it is a more refined camera system. And if you are happy to touch up the odd photo afterwards, you can get some incredible results. Plus, long-range zoom is still best in class. I will definitely revisit this though in my longer term review and see how it stacks up against more of the 2023 competition. Everything else though is all very familiar. If you've used a Galaxy phone for the past couple of years, nothing's going to really shock you here. We get Android 13 with One UI 5.1 on top, which has a couple of features like new modes and routines, and it streamlines some of the privacy settings, but it's nothing groundbreaking really. What I do appreciate is that we get 4 years of Android updates guaranteed with this, and also I really don't have any complaints. Everything is easy to use and responsive and fast, although I did jump into the developer options and halve the animation times. I do that on all my Android phones to make it even nippier. And actually what I do like, because we have such a big 6.8-inch screen, if you open an app and do 2 fingers up, it opens split screen mode. And what I would recommend doing is jumping into the settings, going down to advanced features and even the labs menu. You can be tinkering for days. And I think that's one of the things I do love about the S23, especially the Ultra, is the fun, the experimenting, the pro features that you just don't get with most other phones. Dex, Windows Link, and of course the S Pen all make a return unchanged, but it's still great for pro users, and it definitely makes the S23 Ultra stand out. It's funny, we're like 10 minutes into this video and I've barely even mentioned this thing, the display. It's not really changed outside of the material on the LTPO3 tech. It's the same 6.8-inch 120Hz Quad HD screen, and it's still absolutely gorgeous. Couple of points though, it would have been nice if we had Dolby Vision HDR. Obviously it's a Samsung device, so it's not really that surprising. We don't like their TVs, but it would be nice, and some other phones like the, OnePlus 11 do support Dolby Vision with the upcoming Netflix update. And the other thing is that by default it's set to the full HD resolution, which normally I keep it at to save a bit of battery, but I kind of wish there was an adaptive option or an auto switch like we have with the adaptive motion smoothness, where it changes the refresh rate, because I never really get to take advantage of that Quad HD. It's there, but I don't use it. So to wrap up, and as I concluded in my dissertation at university, more research is needed. Which does sound like a bit of a cop-out, but really I've only had just over a week with this, and I am working on some big battery and camera comparisons with its rivals, and also we haven't had any updates for this yet, so I'm going to come back for a longer term review soon. But for now, I am very impressed with the S23 Ultra. It is a lot of money, and I think maybe the S23 Plus or the Pixel 7 Pro or the OnePlus 11 may be better value choices, but if you want the biggest and just the most versatile phone in the world, this is it. But what do you reckon? You gonna upgrade? Have you already bought one? Let me know what you make of the S23 Ultra in the comments below. I'll also leave my affiliate link below for Samsung if you want to check this out and get that pre-order upgrade. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time right here on the Tech Chat.